Check, check. Yes. Silence.
Bueller. Bueller.
Yeah, a little? No?
Oh, that's a bright light.
There we go.
Sorry.
Can everybody hear me? All right. All right. We're going to get started. Good with video? And we're started. Okay. All right. So, if the schedule, I'm not sure what the schedule reads. I know the online schedule is accurate, but if the printed schedule is a little off, there was a cancellation. We've kind of regrouped in less than probably 24 hours, this panel. So it's a public partnership panel. It's an idea that I've had for some time. My name's Jeremy Mio. I'm the Information Security Officer. Okay. All right. There are a lot of trolls here, so I'm not actually famous in any way. So I'm the Information Security Officer for Cuyahoga County, so over county agencies as well as certain regionalized municipalities. So we offer a lot of services. And the things that not only are issues at the county, but also at the city levels, as well as any other public partnership or public entity or any type of municipality or any other type of essentially even nonprofit, is the resources for cybersecurity services. And you have volunteer firefighters and you have auxiliary police officers, but is there a place for a civic incident response team or advisory services for subject matter experts to apply for, to have some type of structure? So that is the basis of this. This is just a discussion. It's not going to have any type of resolution. I have no, any type of actual means of any type of official capacity of the county other than it just being an idea. So that's what we talk about. So we have some really, really smarter people than myself up here that are in each of the probably relevant industry sectors or their job, and I'll have themselves introduce themselves and go through that. And I'll start with Alex here.
He's so dreamy. So my name is Alex Hammerstone. I work in the GRC department at Trusted Tech. So I work with a lot of different companies to assess and build information security programs. I'm a big fan and proponent of governance, which I think that nobody loves hearing that word, but I think a lot of people are coming around to it. But I'm really happy to be here with you people. And what Jeremy did not mention is that 8% of everything you bought here today goes to the county. So.
There we go.
You're good.
Was it though? Was it?
Hi, I'm Kathy Ullman. I work at the University at Buffalo in the Information Security Office, but I've also been a volunteer firefighter for 22 years. So, thank you. So I kind of understand this from a couple of different angles.
Hi, I'm Kenneth Atchison. I'm in the Department of Computer Science at Baldwin Wallace University, teaching cybersecurity.
So also, I got all of these people together as of this morning. So they have all been, some of which, like Kathy, was notified 5 minutes before of this partnership panel. So think about this. Again, where would this kind of place in cybersecurity as well with some of the government issues and liability, and just kind of like some feedback on first the panel, and then we're going to kind of shoot it out to the audience too. We want this to be kind of a two-way thing. So we really want feedback. Again, is this something that's needed or not? Again, we have a huge community, especially in Northeast Ohio. And this is something that maybe the federal state government could not really do at a large level. This has to be done at the local level.
No falling.
You gonna be okay?
I'll be all right.
All right. So, so really think about this. Probably about 2 months ago, specifically, there was, if you're in the area, a Catholic parish church was essentially wire fraud / ransomware of like over $1.7 million, right? And they're a small, essentially, church. Who knows? They probably they have some IT guy at probably a part of the church. I don't know. I'm not speaking on behalf of that. entity at all. But those are the things that, happen, and they affect people, right? If it's not a church, it's a city, right? How many cities have been, if you look at the city of Atlanta, you look at the city of Baltimore, right? There are still, right now, murder charges in the city of Atlanta that can't be prosecuted because some of the documents in chain of custody were encrypted and essentially lost in some form or fashion. And that's, somebody being charged for something. That's someone's family. That is affecting the local level. So could a civic response team or some type of volunteer response team prevent that? Maybe not. But maybe some advisory service before could. Who knows, right? But can we offer some of these at least even the smaller city level? So I kind of take it right over to Alex here. Down the line.
So, well, I think specific to the Atlanta example, I'd be curious what that city's total budget is for all services and for everything that they do. And it's probably, I don't even know, I wouldn't even hazard a guess. And so would I happily volunteer my time to help certain organizations? Absolutely. And would it be a place with $100 million budget that probably, should be able to find something in there to be able to do IT well and provide services? Maybe not.
So I think that as a community, we have a responsibility to teach. I mean, we all have a certain level of knowledge that, the folks next to you might know more, the person on the other side might know less, but we all have this duty to teach because at the end of the day, if we all want to be safer, there's absolutely no way we can do this if we don't work together. So I think it would be great if we could work to help, especially smaller communities that don't have the resources. I mean, certainly large cities, if they have the money, I think being able to put some money toward that, I think is something they should be doing. And obviously municipalities aren't spending the time or the resources to do that. But I know growing up in a very small town in Western New York, those resources are not there. There's nowhere for that money to come from. And so, if I were still living in that tiny little town, I would certainly see what I could do to put something like that together.
Yeah. So at BW, we've been doing cyber competitions and education for over 10 years now. And we've done a real good job at training, professionals to go into the field. Through our competitions, we attract students, we give the education, and then we ship them out. We started now becoming a Center for Academic Excellence in Cybersecurity Education. So we're trying to get this in NSA designation. And through this, we're establishing this center. And through the center, we are looking to maybe give back to the community. So one of the things one of our initiatives, and got the idea from Jeremy in Cuyahoga County, is to do a community assessment, a security assessment. So for nonprofits and stuff like that, they may not have the funds to, hire a professional or top-level pen test or a security assessment, but our students can get that, give them that assessment and also get the experience of doing that. So that's what we're trying to do.
So just to kind of take that back into the audience and stuff, what do you guys think about that? So I'm going to kind of have a discussion. So I'm going to put some people on the spot. I will call on people. I know a lot of people in this audience. So if you have any feedback, what do you think about this? Think about your city, and if you live in a large city, think about if anyone lives in a small city, what do you think? Would you either volunteer or would you expect somebody to have a volunteer? What do you think about this idea? Anyone? Come on. I'm gonna call on people.
So are you advocating for an offensive response? Are you advocating for an offensive response to these ransomware attacks against our cities in America?
So that's a great question. And what I take with that, because a lot of people automatically go to the offensive and the hack back and some of the issues and the liability, right? Especially certain people. So the thing is that, it might not be a full response team, but it might be advisory services. Imagine if you could look at a contract, which is already public, right? A lot of these boards have public boards which you can go to, and maybe you just know, and it's a community that knows all the meetings that go to, and you could go and maybe put some feedback into those contracts. You can prevent a terrible contract going through public office by just a few comments. But you have to know those technology advisory boards exist, and when they meet and all this craziness that's probably embedded on their website made from, 1990 or something. So those are the things that you need to think about, is you can start there and then work your way into, maybe a more mature program where maybe you're then doing an actual response, based off of some type of policy or plan. And then, you go from there. So.
Although one thing when you talk about the volunteer firefighter model or things like that, that's a credentialed profession. And so you have to, I can't just walk into the fire station and say, hey, I want to start driving the ambulance and giving CPR, right? Well, probably not cities, maybe villages. But so to that end, I think one thing to keep in mind is that, we all know people who are very good at what they do and some people that are less good. And so how do you know if somebody's coming in for a response activity or something like that it's someone that actually knows what they're doing and are actually going to help rather than make it worse?
Yeah, so, definitely you need to have some type of criteria, right? We all probably agree in that, as much as we might not always believe in everyone having some type of certification, everyone having a degree, or everyone some of this, but there probably is some type of waiver experience, or there has to be a process. At the end of the day, there has to be a process. It has to be, you have to know that the people responding, because at the end of the day, it might just be cyber stuff, but that cyber stuff, like in some of the things that I'm directly responsible, are 911 systems. We're talking about, jail systems. We're talking about health systems. We're talking about sequencing machines that might be to a capital murder case, right? Those are pretty obviously important things. So you have to really know, what you're doing, as well as have the experience of what you're doing, to make sure that you're never kind of doing anything to cause those harm at the end of the day. So that's a great, thing. There has to be a process. So what is that process? Can it be something similar to, I know a lot of places in volunteer firefighting, you might have to be a qualified EMT. You might have to be, I used to be on a public, safety diver team, but then they required everyone to be EMTs. And, I didn't have that qualification, so I didn't make the criteria. But I could if I want to, become an EMT. I just didn't have that time. And there are a lot of people that are, probably better qualified just because of the liability.
I think too, you can even start with something a little more simple in this sense. So one of the things we do at the university, and this is fairly new for us, is that instead we have people who order stuff all the time. They buy software from various contracts, and they don't necessarily know what they're buying. They know that it serves whatever purpose that they are trying to fill, but they don't understand the support model necessarily. They don't understand the ramifications of something being the cloud, for example. And so we now have a questionnaire. So even if we aren't necessarily putting a person in line for incident response, even at a basic level, providing them, here are things that you should be asking your vendors when you're going and buying these services. That's even a step that I think most of these, places are not doing.
Yeah, that's definitely a good thing. Again, that's why I try to bring it back from response and offensive things and pen testing back to just advisory services, kind of back to IT 101. What can we tell that these smaller entities that might not even have an IT department and have completely outsourced or nothing, they might have a part-time person they pay. How do we advise them? And at the end of the day, it always becomes a security problem. So I always find the security people telling people how to just do IT 101. But it is what it is. And, somebody can do that. Maybe it starts out as just a technology board that also is security focused, and then more from there. Maybe that's what the first step is. So I kind of put it back out to the audience. So what you think? I know we had some other question over there from Val, because I know people in this audience.
I think beginning with criteria is an excellent starting place. I think that the first function of government is to protect the citizens. You don't have any internal problems to solve if you cannot protect from, those who would do harm to the citizens, internal or external. And that's why I think speaking about criteria of when volunteer is appropriate and when it might not be appropriate is a really good starting place. Personally, as a former teacher, I get really angry when people want me to donate to educational causes, buy supplies for teachers, when your city does not want to fund your own education. If you don't have informed citizens, you're going to eventually have electoral problems. if they cannot critically think, and if they cannot evaluate sources, okay? You've got troubles at some point. They're all going to grow up, and they're going to vote, hopefully. So where I'm going with that is finding the dividing line between unable and unwilling is really important. And where you draw that line and how you set those criteria of what's unable, like, I'm sorry, but I have a really hard time believing Atlanta was not able versus maybe a smaller rural place that might have also significant liability, like, for example, that church, which I did see that. It was like some kind of, like, I think they're going to have to pay off a loan on that or something. I mean, I think parishioners are going to be paying that. You know, what, I forget the details, but it was about a building project. I think it was like an invoice type scam.
Correct. It was a wire fraud or something like that.
Yeah. So, I think criteria are an excellent place to begin.
Yep. Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else? I had a hand over here. I will give my mic to this gentleman.
So I shared the last commenter, I guess. The last commenter's concerned that this might be a strategic issue, and thinking about, you know, if we start using volunteer efforts to kind of back this up, will there be then a lack of funding and a lack of, will it kind of increase the problem, if you will? But there's another question that I have about this too: is even if that's not an issue, is the volunteer effort a sustainable thing? And I don't know the answer to that.
So to kind of just go back through that, having, obviously the credentialed requirements for people, and also knowing where and when to have those responses. Like, is it okay for just advisory services? And then is it maybe not okay for, pen testing on these certain, systems? And it's definitely not okay for maybe offensive, hackback, right? So, no. Yes.
Well, so one thing I'm thinking too, when it comes to when you say unable versus unwilling, and if you take a walk this direction about a quarter mile, you're in a city that I think, they didn't have any functional ambulances or fire trucks for a while. Same thing with police vehicles. Are we going to go to an organization of auto mechanics, and their big meeting and say, hey, you should volunteer your time to help this city? Not necessarily. And so I do think, one thing is, if you were to do a volunteer corps for liability reasons and other things, it would probably need to be more modeled like the National Guard, like a response that comes in and people, like in this room could volunteer their time towards that and then be sent out rather than just walking into a local city hall and say, hey, let me review your contract and maybe I'll find something with it or whatever it may be.
Right. So, I mean, definitely the incentives, we talked about, what would it take? Again, is it appropriate? Right? Is it appropriate for maybe the city of Cleveland as much as it is the village of Brattonall, right? You got to really think about those things. Where do you focus at? And then, maybe you pilot these things and really try to work them through to know some of the kind of gotchas and some of the kinks in it.
Well, I think one of the things we should do is it's a twofold. First, you mentioned the security response, and I think this good response, though, again, is like, should we advocate for, paying ransomware and stuff like that? But I think there's also just the education part. And there's some basic things I think we can probably, through this kind of community stuff, we can pump out. Things like these are best practices, having backups, watching emails, spams, things like that, making sure that transactions are taken care of in a responsible and secure manner. Things like that. I think there's more education more than us just going out and doing pen testing certain places. I think there's a lot more we can do with that. Yeah. Kind of like a public service announcement or something like that.
So we got gentleman in the back there.
Just to add on to the education component.
Could you hold the mic up just a little more?
Just to add to the education component. It starts from the need. We don't know that if I was a firefighter, I don't know if there's a need for firefighting services unless you pick up the phone and you call the fire department, and it circles around that element of need. So just education and awareness, and I believe there's plenty of opportunities, whether it's your local library, set up those opportunities. But the question I have for the panel is, what are good elements to create that need or that desire for that need?
Create the need. How do we make people want to be secure?
I'm not sure that creating the need is necessarily a thing. I think most people want to be secure. I think there's so much in the news now that we have a sort of this problem where people are either so afraid that they don't do anything, they're paralyzed by their own fear, or they just don't know what to do. So I think especially those of us who are, I have one foot in sort of the technical space and one foot in the awareness space. And one of the things that I try to do is I try to educate outside of my own university community, in weird spaces like Facebook. I had a conversation with a woman that works at our university on Facebook that it was independent of my job directly, but she posted something about having to open an encrypted email, password protected email, and how that was redundant. And instead of saying something like, ugh, whatever, why do you think this is redundant, how dumb? I asked her very publicly, so tell me why you think that's redundant. I want to understand. And I took this as an opportunity, and I think that, sort of to speak to 2 points. One, I think we do need to do more educating, and I think we need to get outside of our silos in IT, in security, in general, and we need to find these opportunities when they present themselves and recognize that's what they are. So she explained to me that, she had to put in a password when she opened this email, but she also had to put a password in order to get into her email. And once I explained to her how email in and of itself isn't secure, and so therefore the transmission of this message, the only way to keep it secure was to actually put this password on it, she was like, oh, she had no idea. So I saw this opportunity and I grabbed it. The other piece that I want to speak to is this idea of the volunteer versus whether we pay or not pay. I think there could be a place for a transitional situation where you start perhaps as an advisory board for a period of time, maybe set time in advance, where you say, we'll come in and we'll help you if you're interested, give you some basic guidance to go forward. Here are some places you can look for resources, etc. And when it gets much past that, then they have to be prepared to, maybe pay. That might be one way, because I come from a family of educators. So I get this idea that, we shouldn't be necessarily doing everything for free. But I still think that I'm getting a full-time salary, and yes, I could decide when I walk out the door I'm not going to do anything anymore. But as somebody who feels that this is a teaching role, I can't do that. I don't know if you can do that as an educator, but I can't just shut that off.
Back to Val.
I definitely think that we in information security should probably strive to be more people-oriented and definitely teach people in a manner that does not make them feel stupid. Where I get hung up is doing for someone that is unwilling to do for themselves. And I'm saying someone, but I really mean community. And again, that comes back to, making that connection and educating, kind of leading people, like, look at this picture, and explaining the parts of the picture that might be, not well understood or even being misrepresented by people who have vested interests in the status quo in continuing to do insecure things that put the rest of us at risk. Because at the end of the day, it costs money.
And just to kind of expand back on, and I agree, the education we definitely need to do that, and also do that to politicians. So going back to the kind of the public relevance of this, is that a lot of these elected officials are your next door neighbors, right? At the local level, You definitely have a lot of qualified politicians, right? I have to say that, right? But you also, a lot of your politicians or your elected officials, the local, either the city or the county levels, are your next door neighbors. I mean, these councilmen, these appointed elected officials, and these things are just your next door neighbors that have a huge devotion to public essentially service and want to care about the community. They're not going to be these, crazy business people that know all these things or these technical people. These are your next door neighbors, and you have to educate them even more than maybe even some of the executives are on the boards in your business. They can be the same, but again, the education does definitely make educate them to the way that they don't feel stupid, as well as, to embrace it and make the importance there. I mean, some of them really don't understand this stuff. And if that's a public board and these public meetings that the community needs to come to, there are a lot of public boards, technology specific, that no one shows up to. And for instance, I run a public board called the Technical Advisory Committee for the county. And in the 5 years, I've never had one public person ever show up. So if any of you show up, I would greatly appreciate it because I'm usually alone. And we approve our technology purchases. And anyone from the public, these are posted 72 hours in advance. And you can essentially, have public comment about that, just like you could at a council meeting. Every county, at least the state of Ohio, is mandated to do that. That happens somewhere. And so somewhere in your county, that is happening. But you have to know that. The one thing I do want to expand on a little more is the volunteer versus paid, right? So obviously there are volunteer positions, but as Alex mentioned before, we do take a lot of your money. And where does that money go, right? It goes into road and bridges. It goes into the Q transformation. It goes into, all these things that are happening that, you may have voted on or could have had a public comment on, but how do we expect you to volunteer your time that is worth a lot, right? Industry pays a good amount. Are there other ways? So when you talk about partnering with education universities, the FBI actually understood that this was a problem way back when. About maybe 4 years ago, they started a program where they would send somebody off from a 6 month to a 2 year process to a private industry, a financial service industry, with their clearance, where they were cleared to get certain intelligence, and they were allowed to work for that company. And they were no longer getting paid by the federal government. They were getting paid by the private entity, and they had federal clearance, and they would do this kind of partnership and go around and rotate around, and that happens. And that might have changed since, but that is something that was a somewhat successful model, and might still be going on today. And a lot of other federal agencies have started to do that, where they start rotating their employees in private sector, just to get some of that intelligence in education. Could there be some type of consortium or something, which there are a few in this area, but could they be used to essentially take maybe university students, and then maybe they do a few months at the city of Mayfield Heights, and then a few months at the village of Brattonall, and then a few months at Talmadge, and then go around in a circle and go through and do these advisory services where they're getting paid maybe by a nonprofit, or they're getting their student loans paid, or maybe there's a process to kind of scale this up. Is that maybe a thing that could be researched? And I just kind of leave it at that.
So we actually are a center of excellence in one of the programs that we have, going through the master's program that our computer science folks offer, and they do some things in conjunction with our School of Management. But these kids can go to school and get their entire education paid for, provided that they go work in the not-for-profit sector, whether it's education or government sector. And I'm not sure that a lot of these smaller municipalities even know this is like a thing. But these kids go and they work, I think it's 3 years. They have to do service basically after. And then they can go off and do whatever they want. A lot of them leave and then wind up coming back. I have a friend who worked for a certain 3-letter agency and hated it and left and went into corporate America. He actually worked for Sony right after the major breach. And decided he didn't like that and went back to a different 3-letter agency where he is now, and he loves it. So, maybe some of this is letting people know that, these kids are available to do these kinds of things. And if they make the right opportunities available, that might be an avenue for them to pursue instead of just going to DC, which is where a lot of these kids wind up.
Right. And there's a Cyber Corps program, that exists where you could essentially, it's kind of like the Peace Corps, right? You could essentially go for qualified public service for so long and you get your loans forgiven. And you can do that and you can sign up for that today. I think there's a certain, you had to be in school by a certain time and things like that. But, do local governments do that? Or can local governments unknowingly take advantage of those? Yeah. We just don't know.
Go ahead.
Any more audience feedback on some of that stuff? Like, what do you guys think of those? Who would volunteer? I'm not going to take names, but who would think about volunteering their time from a subject matter expert in their small local city? If that's from just reviewing a contract for, an hour, or if that's maybe making sure that they have a password on their Wi-Fi. I mean, literally. Got a few? Got a few hands?
What that? If that's Larry, I want to hear it.
My name's Larry Spahn. I work with Alex at Trusted Sec. But, as myself, I wouldn't mind volunteering my time as well. I think of a personal experience of mine. I've been on several incident responses where, small accounting firms have been compromised. So when I go to do my taxes, I give mine to my guy. I would love to do pen testing for him. The biggest issue I have is a legal responsibility, right? If I go crash your systems, delete all your data, where's my legal responsibility? So if you're developing a program like this, I think that's an important thing to think about, protecting the people that are volunteering.
I would agree with you wholeheartedly, and that would be my concern as well. Because I would gladly, volunteer to help out where I live in Sugar Falls, right? A village of 4,000 people. And I'd be happy to help them out. But I also don't want to tell them the wrong thing and have everything break. And then what do? They'll sue me for the $11 I have in my checking account. And, so that's absolutely a concern. But I think there's also, but there is some kind of, I do some events, talking like the community or talking to local or small businesses about things they can do to get better. And, even like, sitting where we are, like going back to the municipalities, I know this city paid, it was in the paper, a ton of money to a marketing consultant to come up with a slogan for the city. I'm like, they're free to use their money however they want, but if they were to ask me to come in and do a program assessment and build them a roadmap for free, I mean, probably not, right? Just, versus if somebody, some small town or somebody, with zero money or a nonprofit wanted help, that's a different story. And one more thing, coming in here, I think I almost broke my axle, so I don't know if that money is going to the roads.
So what I mentioned was road and bridges, and at the county we define we only do bridges. The roads are done by the municipalities.
Actually, you're doing a great job with our wing walls on our bridge in town where I live, so thank you.
That's what I like to hear. Anything else from the kind of want this two-way over here? I don't know if you want a mic, you can have a mic. Oh, is that one? That one's longer, yeah.
Just one more quick addition about what Kathy was saying about the scholarship for service option. There are a lot of students interested, and one of the qualifiers that kind of scares them off. I think the actual policy is that you have to work for a qualifying agency for the same number of years that you receive the scholarship for, and a lot of the students, the intended a lot of the people who actually come recruiting those students are three-letter agencies. And just the recruitment process for that can take like a year and a half, and it's uncertain, and there's a really high degree of uncertainty amongst the students after they graduate. I think if local governments were to kind of push this as an option for students and say, hey, we're a qualifying agency and you don't have to go through a 6-month to a year clearance process, that would be a really attractive thing for a lot of students.
And some of just kind of like some of the reasons that is because some of the scholarship money is done by federal loans, right? So you also qualify to have potentially federal loans within that, and that's something that the counties and states, they don't have a giant education department of loans that are crazy. So it definitely is something I think that needs to be discussed at a local level is can they have a partnership with those to be able to be a qualifying agency would be huge, especially since a lot of local and state governments don't require clearances. Yeah. For the Cyber Corps program? Scholarship for service? Well, then there you go. So, like, again, is that something that the education and universities know? Ken?
Doug Highweiler, please come join our presentation. Sorry.
Almost had a guest experience from Doug, but yeah. So, is that something that universities know?
We weren't aware of it. We do have an internship program, which students can work, get an internship either paid or unpaid, and most of them are paid. But we would be interested in that and promoting that type of program.
Anything else? Anything else from the audience here? Oh, there we go.
So, several years ago, the city of Chattanooga was experimenting with the idea of, something like a smart city, right? Where fire, police, medical, all that was tied in with, the cell service, as well as having, like task force, as it were, for all these different things, so that, say, a fire happened, on 6th block, then cell service would react along with the traffic cameras, with traffic service, with all of it worked together and kind of tied in together so that it would direct people away from the fire and direct emergency services toward the fire, right? Part of that involved having like an on-call task force. And they said the biggest problem with that was kind of, some of the stuff that Larry was mentioning, you've got legal and things like that you need to be aware of. But this task force, what they found was this all-volunteer task force. When they had the legal backing and they had the financial backing, they had expertise, they had gone through the proper training, they'd done background checks, all this other stuff. They found that they were able to call upon this task force as kind of like I'd say, Avengers Assemble, but it was a super team of guys that they had handpicked that dealt with these different incidences, whether they be cyber, whatever. They could call them up and go, hey, we need to call you in, Avengers Assemble, right? And sit down and let's talk about this thing. And after going through all the parsing and everything, they said that just solved like 90% of their issues on the front end. So my suggestion to you asked, how would this look? Make a task force. Make an Avengers Assemble, group of folks. Spend a little bit of extra money, go to the city or whatever and say, hey, look, we need some funds to do this. Parse them out, and then have them on call, have them ready, and then when you need them, call them in. So, yeah, just a thought.
I'll add that the National Guard is actually already doing some of this in their trainings, because I helped train the National Guard 2 years ago at their Cyber Shield program, which I didn't even realize was a thing, but they're actually training these folks. So if there's a major cyber incident, they can be boots on the ground and walk in the same way that they do for any other incident type.
Yeah, so to expand on that, the National Guard, especially in every state probably, but I know in Ohio, they do have the protection response team, cyber protection response team, that can come out to any municipality or SLTT, state, local government. And I think in end of April, the city of Akron actually did make that state of emergency and did request the National Guard to come in. And the thing is that why I put about response services, I also talk about advisory. Because the National Guard maybe would do some advisory services if they had the capacity. But again, it's that small municipality that, can I call somebody up to say, hey, what do I need to buy to do more of a preventive measure and mitigation more than a response? And that's why I try to have a little bit of two things here, is a security response as well as preventive, right? We want cities ultimately to have as many preventive responses as possible, or preventive controls. But how do they know what to buy? Like, for instance, do they spend $20,000 on developing a new city slogan? What was that city slogan, by the way?
Well, it's a longer story, but it was what they came up with was "We choose this."
We choose this. So
Not like a positive slogan, but anyway.
So could they have chosen to spend that money on, an actual assessment? I don't know, right? So those are the things we got to think about.
Well, I think, too, it probably comes down to, sharing resources and probably some regionalism, and that, if you think about how organizations work, a company with 10 employees and a part-time IT person probably doesn't have information security staff and, forensic capabilities, whereas much larger companies do. And so if you look at other things, other models with the government, you don't, a small town like mine doesn't have a swift water rescue team or its own SWAT team, but that's regionalized. And so even to that point, if the county were to have some kind of shared, resources that could be, given out. But I think one of the things we always forget is we look at all the things that are possible or, the desired future state. And then but it's just how terrible a lot of things are also. So yes, I mean, just as an industry, we always look at places like, why don't they do InfoSec well? Or why don't they do IT well? Well, they do everything horribly, right? Like all these companies that go out of business, it's not because of InfoSec. It's because they made bad hiring decisions or bad marketing. Or you look at, a lot of these things. So like Baltimore had their ransomware incident. And everyone's like, well, why did they do the basic stuff that prevents it? Well, have you ever been to Baltimore? Right? I mean, it's, what's their murder clearance rate for the police department? What do the roads look like? How hard is it to go into City Hall and get a certificate or whatever it is? If places aren't doing anything well, we can't assume they're going to do IT well.
So definitely about regionalization. So that's something the county here in this area does, and at least does, and also puts a lot of backing into. So they have a regionalization department that literally focuses on what services can we regionalize. A lot of them focus on very general things, right? Very simple. Salt, right? Cities were just paying so much money for salt until they got onto the state contract, right? I mean, you're talking about very, very simple things that are regionalized that you might not really think about. You think about certain things like plows and salt and maybe road construction and things like that, and you're like, oh, well, the city just figures it out. But you know what? If they all used one collectively, it probably saves some money, right? So things like IT are just starting to do this. We host about maybe a dozen municipalities' websites because, again, cities are paying, an arm and a leg just to host maybe 4 or 5 pages. And we can do that when you also get our whole security stack, which is more than what you had before, right? So, how can we then now expand these to maybe have a regionalized response team and advisory services, but then maybe augmented by volunteers that have some type of, either contract or small incentive. What would that take? What would it do for you to do that for your city in some type of capacity where, if needed, you could give maybe some general advisory services recommendations, and maybe if they hear that, it is on them to either agree with it or not. Right? Audience response.
So what I get from everything all of you said is that stop being a passive member of your community, be more interactive. It's your community, right? Get engaged. You may not have a degree or certificate or some qualification, but you have knowledge. Share it openly, freely, right? With those people that make the decisions, but they've been elected in some position. Share it. Help them. Learn. We see this every day. They don't.
Right.
Help them learn.
Yeah, so again, I mean, a lot of your cities and counties, they have probably a very surprisingly amount of public meetings that you can go to. You can, at the beginning of the meeting, you can usually sign up for, those are words of wisdom, by the way. But you can sign up for public comment. And again, those public comments go a lot. People listen. That's 5 minutes you have to address your entire elected officials. And at the end of the day, you think they might ignore you, but you know who else is in that room is the media and other types of directors from those agencies. So regardless if those elected officials listen to you, there are other people in those rooms that listen to you. And you can, say one thing about the media or the people that maybe work at these public agencies, but at the end of the day, if no one's saying that and if they hear it enough, they might be like, hey, maybe we need to look into this, right? And every single public entity has some type of form of channel or communication, and it might be on the worst possible time that you can't get to, but it does exist. Has anyone ever participated or attended some type of public meeting at their local community? Raise your hands. Have you ever made a public comment? Look at that. We got such an audience.
Would it help if we put together a list of when those occur and which ones have like a continental breakfast? Because that's the ones I go to. Actually, I was actually traveling with. We went down to Dayton this week, and they didn't know that you could stop at pretty much any hotel out there for a continental. But
fun facts. Take note. Has anyone ever got a free breakfast at a local? Oh, okay, all right. You might not get one here, but somewhere maybe. But that's good. I mean, would it help though to have essentially a whole aggregate list of, like, in your area, all the public meetings and what to go to?
You can sign up for that list to receive
If you could sign up, instead of trying to navigate some, again, website built in the 1990s or modern that, again, has it embedded into for security reasons, obviously.
That's recorded as my idea.
Yeah, that's a copyright, a Hammerstone. So I leave it to, I mean, on the education side, we have some, at the county, we are huge in economic development. There's a lot of things, if you don't know locally, like Jumpstart and other types of kind of incubators, right? But also they are looking for more economic development to kind of, regionalize, the technology jobs here and try to get better businesses and more jobs here. I mean, from an education perspective, do you guys ever really interact with your local governments on those, other than myself?
No, I have not.
So, minimally, I was part of the, so not only was, I've been a firefighter, I've done fire investigation, but I also was on the emergency management office for a while of my local area. And while I was part of that, I was actually doing IT consulting of sorts for them. So in that capacity, I've done that. The gentleman who used to run that office has since stepped down. So, when that's part of the problem, right? You get involved and then people change. Sometimes you get the same people for years and years and years, and then sometimes you get a change where, they bring somebody else in and then you don't have any more voice, but.
Interesting. Oh, the Patrick here. I know everybody in the audience by name.
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind is we've touched on public education and the older crowd. But I think if you teach security at a young age in schools, then that's kind of the future of where where you're going. So get that into the education systems early. So by the time they're making the laws, they're down there fighting for things. They know security, and it might help in large companies too. Think how much you spend on security awareness. So, like our company's been doing things like actually putting a lot of, time aside. It was big in our Northern Ireland office, but for the community of teaching young kids and going to schools and building big program to say, hey, here's even safety for kids. So it comes back to that, but education early.
I'm with you. I believe the children are the future, and I want to let them laugh and let them lead the way.
So about that and expanding on that, we have a consumer affairs department that focuses on, for instance, they focus on senior education, right? For people, there's a lot of scams going out there for seniors out there as well as anybody. They have a little program for some students, but that's, if you think about it, even going back to even from response to advisory, back down to even something fun going on at the bar over there. If you go back down to, just education to awareness, right? Who here would volunteer just to be a part of the consumer affairs to go out and teach at schools and have an avenue for that at an elementary and I'm sure that all of our businesses probably do it. I know previous businesses that we've done it. And, maybe we need that collective organization to do that better.
We're doing that now. BW has a partner with InfoGuard for a cybersecurity camp. We also do outreach to several high schools in the area to teach not only cybersecurity, but also computer science concepts.
Yeah, we're doing our Gen Cyber Camp next week, which is NSA funded, but even in the year, because I think there was 1 year we didn't get funding, just because so many other schools applied, but, we got sponsors to sponsor us and we did it anyway. So, and we are trying to expand upon that. We have something called Lockdown, where we have multiple schools, including them, who they bring their own students, and the students compete against each other, which is amazing. So I can say from the education sector that we're really actively trying to educate those kids, because you're right, they really are the future, and it's really up to us to lead them, because they're not going to know otherwise.
So I'm just going to kind of leave it at that. If anyone else has any more comments, I know we got kind of the 5-minute mark here. And this was a last-minute kind of panel, but hopefully you learned something today that you didn't know, as well as maybe have in the back of your thought of, this whole discussion of, should there be a response team or some type of advisory services that could volunteer to help municipalities and nonprofits that can't help themselves for whatever reason, or at least offer some type of channel to be able to put some recommendations towards them, because they might never hear the things that we hear every day. And I kind of leave it at that. And I'll leave any other additional comments.
Well, I was going to say one about the education thing is I actually heard yesterday about a Target employee. It was a young employee that was recognized for stopping, it was clearly a fraudulent transaction with some elderly people came in trying to buy a couple $1,000s worth of gift cards. And they had actually just come from another Target where they'd bought a couple $1,000s worth of gift cards. And, if you buy the gift cards at Walmart, it always pops up the warning saying, about fraud and all that. But so it was a young person that was educated about those types of scams that was able to help, an older person. So I really am a huge proponent of educating people so they can help others.
All right. Well, I want to thank all of our panel speakers. And thank you for attending. Have a good rest of BSides. Woo! It is. Good job.